founder and president of Tech for Social Good. And on behalf of my lovely co-founders, Abby, Danielle, and Royce, and the entire Tech for Social Good team, I'd like to extend my very warmest welcomes to all of you today to the National Automation Forum. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'd also like to extend that respect to all First Nations people present today and acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded and that this land always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So the National Automation Forum really tries to solve two main issues facing young people today. And I think the first issue is that young people are disengaged from conversations on policy and on important issues facing Australia, like the future of work, the future of industry, the future of technology, and even the future of Australia itself. And I think the second problem is that young Australians rarely feel like that their voice actually matters, or that their opinions and thoughts can lead to meaningful change. And that's why we're here today. Today, we're bringing together some of Australia's brightest and most innovative students, and we're giving them the platform to present their ideas to some of the nation's leading experts and thinkers on automation, technology, and policy. The forum itself is the culmination of the week-long National Strategy Challenge, which had over 270 participants from 10 universities across Australia. The students here today have been selected from over 70 teams across the country and will present their solutions to how Australia can make the most out of automation while ensuring that it's socially and economically inclusive for all Australians. The teams here today competed in the semi-finals of the National Strategy Challenge, and we were really amazed by the quality of the submissions and had a seriously difficult time choosing the best submissions. So I'll now talk about the event. From 2 to 4 p.m., the students will present their solutions to the judging panel, and from 4 to 5 p.m., we'll have a Q&A session where anyone can ask the judges any burning questions that they might have. So in today's judging panel, we have Ed Centel, industry professor at UTS and the former Australian Human Rights Commissioner, Sechkin Ungar, partner at McKinsey & Company, Leslie Noble, industry professor at UTS and former New South Wales Education Deputy Secretary, Janani Janathana, senior project officer at the Sydney Policy Lab, Luke Ginn, managing director at Accenture, and Charlie Taylor, former senior partner at McKinsey & Company. And I'd also like to acknowledge that this event would not have been made possible were it not for the tremendous support from our founding partner, Gradient Institute, who have kindly donated the prizes for the participants today. Before I continue, I'd like to invite Bill Simpson-Young, CEO of Gradient Institute, to provide a keynote address.
Thanks, Vincent. And I'm filling in for our chief scientist, Tibero Caetano, who was hoping to say a few words today, but actually hasn't been able to because he's not well. So I'm really excited about this event. I'm really impressed with the Tech for Social Good movement. You know, the students who put that together are really impressive. We had an amazing launch a few months ago of the organisation, and to see them put together initiatives like this is fantastic. Gradient Institute, if you're not aware of it, is a not-for-profit research centre that works specifically on responsible artificial intelligence. We are lucky to have people like Vincent involved with the Institute. We're working on areas to try to, mostly with companies, to try to help those companies who are using AI, use the AI in a responsible way, not just with high-level checklists, but actually with technology that helps support ethical decision-making. And now on the focus of this competition, I've worked my whole life in automation, and in the past, a lot of focus with automation has been on automating what can be automating, or automating what's cool to automate. What I think we should be working on is trying to generate a world, and this is great to have a new generation working on this, who I'm sure will do it much better than my generation, but working on trying to make a world where humans end up having richer and more fulfilling lives with the technology doing the boring bits, right? And what really breaks my heart is when I see all these people in all these careers who are really working on things that are much better to be done by machines, and machines trying to do things that are much better to be done by humans. It must be, where sometimes we have machines trying to do what is much better to be done by humans, where humans can apply human values and human decision making, but where the more mundane aspects and the more repeatable work, the work that has to be done at scale, can be done by machines. I don't think we have that balance right yet. I think there's still many boring jobs out there. There's still many machines doing what they shouldn't be doing and making mistakes doing that. And I hope that the people here can work on trying to make a better world where there's the best use of both humans and machines. I'll leave it at that for my keynote. I want to keep it short so we can get on to the exciting stuff. So thank you very much for coming, everybody. I'm really impressed with Tech for Social Good, and I hope they'll keep doing this. I'm thrilled that there's been so much uptake of students involved in this, and I hope everyone will continue working on trying to make automation more responsible and more ethical. There's a lot of work to do. There's a huge amount of work to do, as most of you will know. Okay, back to you.
Thanks so much for that, Bill. So now we'll head over to the student presentations part of the National Automation Forum. So each of the teams will present for 15 minutes, and then there will be 5 minutes for Q&A from the judges. And on the top of our list, the first team to present will be Team 26. So Team 26, whenever you guys are ready.
In 2011, Charlie Brooker released a series of near-future dystopias, pushing the bounds of science fiction technology. From drone warfare to simulated realities, algorithms that could determine court sentences seem like a Black Mirror episode just begging to be made. But instead of pitching this concept to Netflix, we're here pitching to you instead.
The legal industry has been reluctant towards adopting automation due to concerns around the security of this technology and the traditionalism of the sector. Despite this, the industry has cautiously and gradually begun to introduce automation in pursuit of increasing speed and accuracy and reducing risk.
When McKinsey Global Institute reports that 23% of lawyers' time can be automated with current technology, it becomes abundantly clear that legal automation and its implications is a priority concern within the legal sphere. According to the World Bank, there is a positive correlation between the number of court automation techniques and access to justice. As seen in the graph on the right, the vast majority of the economies that implemented more than 4 court automation techniques scored 0.6 or higher. As a corollary, the market has seen a trend towards innovative legal tech startups like Sprint Law, Law of the Jungle, and Legal Vision optimized to efficacy in practice. These trends have made the legal sector more efficient and accessible than ever by increasing productivity, but also accessibility, as it reduces costs of lawyers when laborious tasks, which form the bulk of their time, can be automated.
The legal system ought to serve justice, yet an overclogged, inaccessible court system and judicial bias has led to rampant miscarriages of justice. The first issue in the sector is that of inefficiency. Given that justice delayed is justice denied, and appellants face everyday impacts of waiting for their case to be heard in court, automation is able to speed up these processes. Similarly, overcrowding in prisons is economically inefficient and leads to individuals being subject to terrible prison conditions. The second issue is the failure of the judicial system to uphold procedural and substantive fairness. Striking the balance between protecting the rights of the accused and the well-being of the community is difficult for judges, especially given that there are so many variables to consider. Further, vulnerable stakeholders that the law has a priority to protect are marginalized in the justice system. Specifically in regards to automation on the legal sector, there are 3 potential risks. 1, given that algorithms are trained by a given data set, there are risks that historical biases from this data would bias automated outcomes. 2, in addition, there may be difficulties translating law into code, and whether automation is equipped to understand and process nuances of language and context to generate appropriate legal outcomes. And the final issue is the implication of automation replacing jobs within the legal sector. All of the issues addressed above are prevalent, particularly in a courtroom setting, which is thus the focus of our strategy. Hence, the question that we are addressing today is, how can we best adopt automation to serve justice in delivering equitable and efficient sentencing outcomes?
Our strategy is to incorporate algorithms into the decision-making processes of judges, specifically in regards to delivering sentencing outcomes. This will be implemented over 4 stages. Firstly, supporting, secondly, integrating, replacing, and then disrupting. In this third approach, automation is increasingly integrated into judicial decision-making. The first stage is adopting algorithms to inform, support, and advise judges. There are 2 elements in this. Firstly, facts and evidence about the offender will be automatically identified and categorized into parameters defined by programmers in the algorithm. These parameters would be factors like the offender's age, background, severity of crime, flags to relevant case law and statutes such as maximum penalties of an offense. An example of existing technology which can simplify the analysis process is natural language processing, in particular processing techniques such as name entity recognition. This is the first part of the 2-part algorithm implemented in later stages. Secondly, similar algorithms can be employed to completely automate menial tasks that are necessary to judicial decision-making. This would include proofreading judgments, streamlining legal research by finding relevant precedents and routine tasks.
The second part of the algorithm is introduced in the integrating stage. Here, the data from the parameters is synthesized to determine a sentencing outcome comprising the length and type of sentence. This information would be fed into the algorithm by court transcripts, written submissions of lawyers, and the manual input of judges where necessary. This algorithm would use machine learning techniques such as neural networks, where datasets from historical sentencing outcomes are fed into the program for the algorithm to process and learn. At this stage, the algorithm-informed sentence is a non-binding suggestion, which effectively acts as yet another tool judges are able to use to coming to their decision. Further, once the sentence is handed down, the algorithm-informed outcome will be weighed alongside the judge-determined outcome to identify major discrepancies produced by the sentencing algorithm. As the algorithm errs from judges' decisions, these errors are input and registered by the algorithm, which takes this information into account for future decision-making. Hence, the algorithm becomes more intelligent and accurate over time. The unique advantage here is that the algorithm is effectively trained by every single judge in the court system as it takes in input from all of their decisions. To address the algorithm repeating historical biases from data sets, recent judgments are weighed more strongly than historical ones.
In the third stage, the algorithm effectively replaces a judge in the majority of sentence ruling. Instead, the judge plays the role of moderator, reviewing the results of the algorithm to ensure any erroneous outliers are identified. Any errors will be fed back into the machine learning algorithms, improving its accuracy. In the fourth and final disruptive stage, judges directly manipulate the algorithm to be actively biased in the opposite direction of existing biases to offset them. Here we're talking about biases like those against Indigenous offenders, people of colour, and low socioeconomic status offenders. Such decisions to recalibrate the algorithm would be decided by current High Court judges. Note here, we're not training judges to become programmers. Recoding the algorithm would remain in the hands of the computer scientists who would be directed by judges. However, learning about the principles of programming would become fundamental to the legal education of judges and law students.
The feasibility of our strategy is supported by existing automation across international legal systems and preliminary technologies in Australia. The prevalence of automated algorithms already existing and operational across international legal systems is a convincing basis. For example, in the US, Compass technology is used to assess recidivism risk and is a formal part of sentencing processes in 10 states. Similar technologies are used in the UK and Mexico, HEART and Expertise, respectively. The feasibility of automation is also supported by the fact that algorithms already exist in legislation today. The outcomes of 90% of criminal offences don't involve judges and are rather decided by an algorithm. For example, a speeding fine can be reduced to an assessment of variables such as how much the speed limit was exceeded and past violations of the driver. Algorithms are also currently used to make legal decisions in other areas of law, like immigration, taxation, and social security. Further, the willingness of the law to use alternative sentencing measures is supported by existing strategies like circle sentencing for Indigenous offenders. This algorithm is thus a natural extension beyond this.
Fundamental to any form of automation is increasing the efficiency of a task. This year, 92% of legal departments are expecting reduced budgets. Here, automation presents a clear opportunity to match this. Automating menial tasks, often tedious manual processes, reduces documentation times and increases efficiency. When this technology is transferred to the courts, this holds the potential to reduce the significant backlog in the system, which has only worsened with the transition to virtual court in COVID-19. Algorithms are also preferred for judicial change as they bypass the issues of regulation, which are hard to implement and monitor and face large time lags. Leveraging automation in the court retains the determinative role of judges, but facilitates more consistent and predictable outcomes. At its core, introducing an algorithm into sentencing outcomes introduces structure into the analysis. This attempts to remove inherent bias and reflexivity in judgments, removing the influence of racialized policing and prosecutorial practices. The concept of judicial activism will be streamlined, where judges attempt to use their decisions to further a social policy beyond a merely static legal role. However, our strategy ensures that this does not become too dependent on the personal bias of each judge.
As such, the automated judicial decision-making attempts to redress a system which does not account for social cultural disparities. In Australia, the criminal justice system has seen substantially higher incarceration rates for Indigenous people, which has increased by 88% since 2004 and only increased 28% for non-Indigenous individuals. Hence, stages 2 to 4 of our strategy aims to alleviate inherent biases by recalibrating the algorithm to place a greater weighting on recent data rather than historically entrenched biased data. In doing so, the criminal justice system adopts a preventative approach rather than a punitive one, which better enables minorities to escape the cycle of reoffending and promotes adequate rehabilitation. Consequently, this grants a more accessible justice system for minorities as decisions become more objective and easier to understand. From an economic standpoint, introducing automation into the legal system will help reduce the $4.6 billion spent on incarceration in 2017 to 2018 and lessen the workload of judges, increasing economic efficiency through more productive allocation of resources. The capital and resources saved could instead be spent on and reinvested into the research and development of effective sentencing algorithms.
Our strategy also actively mitigates risks associated with automation processes. The most salient issue is importing human bias into the algorithm. An investigation into the US Compass technology revealed the algorithm could propagate existing racially biased trends in incarceration. To mitigate these biases in historical data, human oversight is needed. This is addressed in stages 2 to 4 of our strategy, where judges proactively counteract biases in the algorithm. Another risk is the failures in accuracy, creating more appeals and worsening backlog. However, the algorithm, which self-learns and improves along with human oversight, can evaluate appeals which are excessively inappropriate. Additionally, there is a risk that judges will be reluctant to engage with such technologies and that there may be public hesitancy towards a change. To combat this, our graduated tiered rollout ensures that there's enough time for judges and individuals to acclimatize to the change. Of course, with time and an increasing number of successful sentences, the confidence in the technology will also increase. Secondly, upskilling of judges and educational campaigns for the general public will accompany the rollout, as well as media updates from the government in the news. Finally, legal tech literacy will begin at a grassroots level, where when these are mandated in the legal education of current and future law students.
The long arc of history tends towards justice, which has led us here to the courts today, instead of a Hollywood movie studio. It is a choice we'd happily make any day, even if Qantas opened up flights to LA. Thank you, and we'll take questions now.
Yep, so judges feel free to ask questions. We have around 5 minutes for the Q&A session.
Great presentation. It's Luke Higgins speaking. Question I had just was, what sort of training time do you think it would take to kind of get the algorithm at a point where it could be, I guess, engaged with, and would you sort of attack it? I could see your sort of stepped approach made sense, like introducing it as an advisory first and then train it further. But just wondering on that sort of time frame that you were expecting, that it would take.
Yeah, Luke, happy to take that. If we could hop over to Appendix C, please. We'll see that we essentially are taking a bottom-up approach in terms of there are some technologies which can be implemented already, such as the replacement of menial tasks can already be introduced into courts such as the lower courts and the federal magistrates courts. So at that fundamental level, we'll be adopting that bottom-up approach from those courts onwards, and those technologies can already kind of be implemented. As the technology becomes more advanced and we kind of produce it and there's more investment into it, we predict that it'll gradually be able to roll up towards the higher courts as well. And that means that the stage 4 technology, i.e. the disruptive technology, can also be implemented into the lower courts as well. And so as you can see in the timeline, the lower courts will be first introduced into the less complex technologies, but over time will be introduced to the higher more complex technologies, whereas at a later stage, the higher courts are introduced to the less complex technologies.
Cool. Okay. And just the general precedence of, I guess, of applying it. Have there been many papers written so far on like, I guess, how accurate the classifiers will be on being able to build those reinforcement learning models? So.
Yeah, so if we take us to appendix slide, it should be appendix slide A. There are a number of current studies that we use currently in terms of these algorithms in the legal sphere. Notably, ones we've mentioned are the US Compass, in the UK you have HART, and in Mexico you have Expertius. The main difference that we have from these technologies is the fact that we weigh bias in to offset current existing bias against people who are currently marginalized by the system. That bias is something you are literally able to code for by weighing certain factors more strongly than others, and therefore is something that you can definitely enact straight away.
And was there any scores, like F1 scores or other, that were produced on those, or?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch you. Could you repeat that?
Were there any sort of F1 scores or like, precision-based scores that were tested against?
Yeah, so in terms of the US, Compass has been effective in giving you a recidivism score. The main issue with that recidivism score, when weighed against people of different classes or of different backgrounds in terms of social and economic backgrounds, was that there were discrepancies between the two, but the actual sentencing outcome for people who weren't biased by the system, which predominantly tends to be white males, was accurate against current kind of measurements as well. The only ones that were biased against were the people like Black communities or Indigenous communities, but insofar as we are able to weigh against that bias, that kind of precision score is also met.
I might turn to Ed. I see you have your hand up, but do you have a question about this presentation?
Yeah, and congratulations from me as well. It was very impressive. I had a question really regarding how, it's a methodological question about how you would tune your system to kind of increase accuracy over time. As I understood it, the method will be you have the kind of algorithmically generated suggestion versus the judge's decision. And if there's a discrepancy between the two, you prefer the judge's decision and you basically tell your algorithm that its decision is wrong. What if it's actually the judge, the human judge is wrong? How have you landed on the fact that the human judge will always be the source of truth in the event of a discrepancy?
So it's important to note here that obviously judgments that you might get against any judge is going to differ. If you look at the High Court alone, anyone who has dissented probably means that they differ from the judgment of another judge. So therefore, there is no completely correct or objective judgment that you get from any judge. The reason that we pin this against current judges is because of that effective rollout stage in generating trust and generating transparency. Because the current in the status quo, we recognize that judges probably have the best decision. And I think it's important to note that the standard you are measuring it against is never something objective, because there's probably no objectively correct decision. In fact, that you are always going to have subjective features in that decision. And then therefore the question becomes, is this standard something that reduces the current biases that you see? And it is impossible for us to just enact something straight away and just say the algorithm is correct, because obviously that would be socially unacceptable, and people would obviously have huge amounts of backlash led against it. So insofar as we trust our current court systems to process things like divorce cases, or to process things like criminal law cases, that's the current precedent that you use to say that judges are so far currently the correct ones. And obviously any kind of incorrections are going to be made later when the algorithm becomes smarter and better when you feed it it's like kind of discrepancies.
I think we can take one more question from, Ed, from Sajkan.
Great presentation, guys. And I'm not sure if you know, but I'm a forensic psychologist by background, so I found that particularly interesting. You talked about a number of different use cases for the technology. The emphasis seemed to be on technology that sort of predicts risk of reoffending. I think your strategy was really anchored on sentencing decisions, right? So I was just wondering, have you, in your research, seen any evidence of, anywhere where they've actually used AI technology to determine sentencing or to guide sentencing? If not, why do you think that is, and how might you overcome some of the barriers to adoption in this industry?
In answering the first part of the question, there's no explicit algorithm that spits out a sentence that we want in terms of comprising of length and the type of sentence. Rather, the Compass in the US, for example, guides on things like recidivism. I think recidivism is one of the aggravating factors that you might get in a judgment. So insofar as that is true, it probably helps guide the judge in their judgment that if you have a high recidivism score, you might be more likely to have more punitive measures of punishment. So it is currently kind of somewhat incorporated into current technologies. But for us, when we make the first part of our algorithm is basically to synthesize normal language into programmer-defined parameters. And then basically we just have a larger host of aggravating and mitigating factors, a larger host of flags to current legislation and statute or current kind of case law. So you are able to effectively use the current technology you see in Compass or in any of the other strategies that you have in the UK and Mexico, but we just make that on a bigger macro kind of scale.
Okay.
Awesome. I see, Liz and Charlie, you guys also have questions. In the interest of time, I'll sort of move on to the next presentation and sort of take your questions on that one. So I invite Team 1 to now share their screen, and we look forward to your presentation, and amazing job to Team 26.
Good afternoon, all. In line with the National Automation Council's goal of better understanding the effects of automation, today, Yong, Sophia, and I will be proposing a strategy on how Australia might best prepare for the era of digital health over the next 15 years. Automation has already revolutionized many industries, but with the major productivity gains it's delivered to early beneficiaries such as manufacturing and retail, it's clear this trend will only gather pace. In fact, 23% of current work hours are projected to be automated within the next decade. In recent years, and in particular in light of COVID, automation has begun to disrupt Australia's healthcare sector. Telehealth and consumer wearables are part of a digital health market that is expected to grow exponentially in the years to come. The possibilities are endless. Automation will not only bring about operational benefits from reduced admin, but also clinical ones, allowing for more personalized and preventative medicine and the potential to address ongoing challenges of health inequity. Before detailing our strategy for the future, we thought it was important to first examine the strengths and weaknesses of the status quo. Australia, as a prosperous and progressive nation with a robust education system, is well placed to partake in a digital health ecosystem. Yet, existing inequities, especially for Australians of rural, Indigenous, and low socioeconomic status, underinvestment in cybersecurity, and competing causes for healthcare expenditure, such as outdated infrastructure, are key areas that need to be considered. We believe that a good strategy will not only leverage existing strengths, but address these weaknesses as well.
The brief that we received was to answer why so few opportunities in digital healthcare had been realised. Our vision is for Australia to focus on scaling out automation to improve productivity and the equitable adoption of technology in the healthcare sector over the next 15 years. However, we face obstacles in achieving this. First, the limited technological skills in the healthcare sector. Second, a lack of trust amongst the public about digital security of their personal data. And third, a lack of investment into digital innovation. To overcome these obstacles in the era of automation, we need to educate, regulate, and accelerate to achieve our goals to develop a cohesive plan for a socially and economically inclusive way to automate the healthcare system whilst capturing productivity gains.
Over the next 15 years, our digital healthcare strategy seeks to leverage automation to provide equitable and high-quality access to healthcare. Our strategy seeks to deliver 50% time savings from digital technologies while ensuring the gains in efficiency are distributed equally, focusing on elderly and rural or regional users. As we transform medical administration and operation, with the goal of over 90% of healthcare workers adopting some degree of automation in their day-to-day practice, we want to minimize unemployment by upskilling individuals. While the use of big data grows in the healthcare space, a key indicator of success will be maintaining public trust, with over 80% of users willing to receive digital healthcare solutions. We have concentrated on solutions which target a large cross-section of the Australian healthcare system, where government investment and action can make an appreciable impact. High-impact solutions are placed at the top of our matrix and easily actionable solutions on the right-hand side, choosing to focus on growing the technical competency of patients and professionals, data management, and the equitable automation of operations in both preventative and
The era of automation begins with the education of Australian workers, students, and patients. One of the most actionable and potentially impactful solutions is the introduction of annual rankings for the tertiary sector, scoring universities and TAFEs on how well they are equipping their students with in-demand skills such as digital literacy and leadership. This government-backed initiative will promote awareness for the importance of graduate preparedness, guiding the student decision-making process when selecting universities or TAFEs. Given that over 2/3 of institutions use rankings as a management tool to bring about change, these students will benefit from the regular introduction of new initiatives from unis and TAFEs seeking to improve their annual rankings. A targeted government funding program will also be implemented to help under-resourced institutions introduce their own initiatives. With a 15-year time horizon, we thought it was important to also consider highly impactful initiatives that may require more long-term investment as well. While rankings for the tertiary sector will help prepare much of the future workforce, a key question is, how can we upskill existing workers and patients and create a program resilient to ongoing disruption as automation continues to advance? In recent years, retraining programs have been gaining momentum and early signs have been promising. The program in France has seen a 200% increase in participation in its first 3 years, and 8% of Singapore's labour force were using their equivalent within 4 years. When developing our Australian proposal, we sought to learn from the most established and successful programs overseas, in the US, France, and Singapore. Upon investigating the most effective and challenging aspects of these programs, we identified 3 key areas of focus for success. The first is to have a well-funded program not subject to fluctuations in government funding. To do this, we decided to mirror France's approach with funding earmarked by a 1% business levy. The second is credibility. A key challenge experienced in Singapore has been a lack of recognition of qualifications by businesses. To combat this, we propose the establishment of a government-certified training industry with the gradual introduction of mandated certification, targeted especially at those most in need of reskilling. And the third is accessibility. We know that those most at risk of being left behind by automation are those already facing inequity and hardship. By integrating our program into the welfare system and offering additional means-tested funding, job seekers and high-risk workers will be well placed to find employment. Further, as training providers establish a physical presence in communities, patients and workers without internet access or existing digital skills will be able to partake in the program. By addressing these three areas, our program will thus ensure workers and patients of all socioeconomic backgrounds may reap the rewards of the digital health revolution.
To facilitate the rollout of automation, we will pair inclusive digital education initiatives with regulation that supports the individual's privacy rights. We've found that privacy is a key concern for individuals when choosing digital services. However, we currently observe a trend of increasing data breaches due to human error and sophisticated cyber attacks on the healthcare industry, along with decreasing public trust over how their data is managed. We expect skepticism to grow as digital growth accelerates and healthcare solutions trend towards personalization. It is imperative that the government takes measures to reverse these trends, given the sensitivity and importance of public health. Our initiatives aim to reduce human error and increase user control over their own data to foster a culture of trust that is necessary for continued innovation and delivery of high-quality care in the sector. Although health information is controlled more strictly than other personal data, regulations encourage an all-or-nothing approach to data management, and no benchmarks about what constitutes de-identified or anonymized data currently exist. To encourage user adoption and trust in the government's digital health services, we will increase transparency by empowering users to take control over their digital health profile, rolling out a user-friendly consent management tool on top of the existing My Health Record interface. Users can determine what kind of data gets attached to their health record. For example, their previous insurance claims, their contact information, or data from their wearable devices. With each of these categories, users will also be able to specify the level of anonymization they wish to have, allowing direct third-party access, limited access under a pseudonym, or completely anonymous and aggregated information. And where information is required for delivery of emergency care, users will be notified. Data will then be stored in a centralized government trust, where security, encryption, and anonymization are managed to balance the need for rich sources of data for healthcare innovation and the individual right to privacy. Organizations will be able to leverage the government's existing databases to facilitate innovation. The government will set limits on the acceptable usage to protect data. Since the majority of breaches come from human error, there will be a shared responsibility to require employees to have adequate levels of digital literacy and understanding of cybersecurity risks. In addition to threat mitigation, they will also limit third-party access to sensitive data. We recommend adopting a structure similar to the existing Microsoft Health Vault and Google Health platforms. Under this model, organizations will submit requests for data to be evaluated. The government data trust will then match them with data which fits both the user's defined consent controls and their own research requirements. So the data trust acts as an intermediary between individual and organizational interests, releasing the minimum amount of data necessary to fulfill their aims to reduce the threat of leaks and
So now on to acceleration. In this era of automation, we seek to accelerate the digitisation of our healthcare to ensure equitable health outcomes. This means utilising existing health infrastructures to make sure that there is equitable access. Educating existing health staff, as Daphne spoke to, is critical in a smooth transition. First, through My Health Records, which has not yet been rolled out consistently across Australia, with only 72% of South Australian hospitals utilising My Health. Second, to digitise hospitals to reduce the administrative burden on health practitioners and allow them to spend more time on what they do best, providing healthcare. This will also guarantee that healthcare professionals can access patient data quickly in critical times, With 35% of public hospitals still not digitised, we look to rapidly accelerate the process to maximise productivity. Third, to ensure that healthcare is inclusive, we propose for the government to fully fund video health through Medicare, allowing patients who are otherwise unable to access healthcare to receive high quality care from their homes. This means that rural and regional communities are able to access healthcare, whilst video conferencing allows older and non-English speaking patients to access better patient care. With 93% of homes already connected via broadband to the NBN and rural households connected via fixed access and satellite, telehealth and traditional health will still remain at the fore to support those with limited technological access and to allow digitally literate medical professionals to also support their own patients. Capital raising is a key barrier for those who try to innovate in this space. By encouraging innovation and investment, we support further research and development in this area. Some of the challenges faced in the commercialisation of digital healthcare include a lack of capital spurred on by a few dedicated digital healthcare investors. To overcome this, we look to government to facilitate the matching of investors and to allow those one-to-one meetings to occur. Talent and skill attraction and retention is difficult, but to encourage graduates and existing entrepreneurs to innovate in the digital space, we believe that showcasing and identifying that local digital health success stories act to inspire and highlight the value of digital healthcare innovation. This is further supported by our education strategy to improve the digital literacy of health professionals and spur graduates into the digital tech space. Healthcare is a highly regulated field and for good reason. However, this is challenging for healthcare startups. Clear government guidelines need to be established to help startups understand and abide by the regulations, namely the cybersecurity and privacy laws that Yong spoke to. Personalised patient care is a gap within the digital healthcare space and is both actionable and impactful. Preventative and outpatient care can be optimised to develop patient-centric care. Firstly, through patient alerts to remind patients of their appointments and all important vaccines and upcoming tests, which can reduce non-attendance at appointments and empower patients to stay in control of their own health. Second, specialist care to allow particularly those who suffer from chronic health conditions to receive consistent care across healthcare practitioners. And this can be achieved through specialist e-referrals, a feature of My Health currently lagging behind. And third, patient care at home to reduce hospital stay lengths. This needs to be rolled out nationally, despite already being trialled by the government in some outpatient cancer patients. We need to ensure that everyone can benefit from this. Our comprehensive health plan for this era of automation is to educate, regulate, and accelerate. By educating both existing staff and graduates, we look to maximise digital healthcare innovation by improving digital literacy. This in turn will support trust in the system to uphold the privacy of patients, with medical professionals better able to inform patients of digital consent. All the while, improving access to healthcare by supporting the government and private sector to develop patient-centric care.
Thank you, Team One. Great presentation. I'll now turn to our panel for a Q&A session. Yep, Janine.
Yeah, hey, that was great. Thank you so much, team. My question kind of speaks to, obviously there's thought put into digital literacy programs, and just given recent contexts around, robo-debt, even with the COVID vaccine rollout, we have seen particularly vulnerable communities like people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, Indigenous communities, people with disabilities and people of colour. And obviously that's due to a few factors, but one of them being trust and also access. So I'm just wondering, with the digital literacy and even just building trust, how we're thinking about accessing those communities and making sure, they're accounted for.
I don't mind taking that one. I think one of the main ways to do this is through people that they already trust. And the people that they already trust are people within their communities. They're people like their GP that they've been going to for years. And I think in us training those existing medical staff to give them the digital literacy themselves, it means that then their patients will also trust the system. Because if they can see their GP bringing up My Health when they go to the doctor, then they're going to think, oh, well, if my GP trusts it, maybe that is something that I can trust. And then when they go to the pharmacist, they also see this. And I think it's those sorts of things where it's at community points, at points of access that they already trust. That's when you develop that relationship and where you start to feel more comfortable with the technology.
Great response, thank you. The only thing I'd love to see and add is just even form, this is obviously detail oriented, but just also accounting for different formats with people with disability.
Yeah, for sure.
Leslie?
Yeah, well done. And my God, yeah, I don't think you would have slept all week, because that is an extremely ambitious and wide-ranging endeavor that you've brought to us. So thank you. I just wanted to know, how did you think about the stakeholders? What stakeholders would be involved in this? How did you think about working through moving from conceptualization to policy through to implementation?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. So during our research process, we did actually identify some government reports by the Australian Digital Health Agency, and they explicitly were identifying, firstly, the end users that would most likely benefit from digital health technologies, and secondly, just general oh, sorry, off the top of my head. Sorry. Firstly, on the topic of end users, that would obviously be things like healthcare practitioners, patients themselves. And then in addition to that, we were looking at whose jobs would actually be affected by this. So for example, admin staff would be in particular a major stakeholder in that respect. So we consulted the research there, and we used that to guide our policy making for the education, regulation, and acceleration aspects of our strategy.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Just just to add on to what Daphne said, the reason we came up with such a wide-ranging solution is that we found that in order to address both the patient and medical professional side needs, you couldn't just have regulation or just have an acceleration of innovation. You really needed all three of these to work together to engage both the community and the medical professionals. Yeah.
Terrific, thank you.
Charlie?
Well, congratulations, both this presentation, last presentation, have taken on extremely challenging industries, given the consequences of, if you like, failures in service delivery. But you've shown an amazing, gone into an amazing amount of detail and understanding. One of the big challenges in these industries is that often it's sort of a funding model which has been based around activity. And we've seen that big challenge with telehealth, and it took COVID to actually bring it in because of all the resistance to moving to this model, both on concerns around how funding would blow out and how that gets managed with the professionals who are often quite resistant to it as well. Any thoughts from a sort of how to think about how do we actually, government think about funding this industry that might help with getting the right level of digital uptake going on here?
Yeah, I think with telehealth, one of the things we noticed particularly is that the medical community has a sense of resistance too. And I think it comes from the fact that there's an impression that telehealth isn't legitimate in patient care. And I think it's taken COVID for us to realize that it is a legitimate form of patient care. And I think what is already existing is that rural and regional communities, or mainly remote or rural communities, have access to telehealth via Medicare already. But what we're looking to do is to spur the government to try to actually encourage them to have video health fully covered by Medicare. And I think the funding model is something that does need to be considered, but I think it can still be funded in the way that going to your normal GP is funded. I think a lot of people think that costs will blow out dramatically because more people might go because suddenly telehealth is more accessible. First, it is not necessarily a bad thing that more people are going, because it just means that people are getting the medical attention that they need that they otherwise could not access, because they think that going to the doctor is just a step too far for them. So I think that costs will blow out inevitably because we do have an aging population. And I think that's just something we have to be aware about. I think the second is that we can mitigate a lot of those costs through automation. So a lot of the costs that we talk about are administrative costs, and that can be mitigated by having the administrative burden reduced through automation. And third, I think, is just technological mishaps, like medical professionals just not getting on Zoom, like knowing how to get on Zoom, and that taking up a lot of time. And I think in training medical professionals to actually understand and use the software effectively, it can reduce that time between appointments, and you can just get through more and just be a better doctor or better nurse.
Yeah, and jumping in as well with that, I think one of the big challenges with the healthcare industry, as opposed to other industries like manufacturing and retail, is that it's very heavily reliant on government funding, whereas other industries are fueled by private institutions looking at maximizing their profit. But I think that, but we believe that with the government stepping in and sort of accelerating the startup industry, for example, we'll be able to create new technologies in Australia, which will be extremely beneficial in the long run to the Australian economy as well. And so we will see those benefits as well.
Thank you so much, Team 1. That was a fantastic presentation. I now invite Team 50 to share their screen and let me know whenever you're ready so I can begin timing.
So, automation and AI is evolving at an alarming rate. Our group has identified that police and law enforcement to be a sector significantly affected by automation. The purpose of police has always been to uphold order and keep the community safe. Though this has not changed throughout the decades, the way in which this is achieved is constantly evolving. Today, Stephanie, Anna, Harish, and I will be taking a deep dive into how the unceasing innovation of automation and AI seeks to disrupt law enforcement. So, this is our main focus for the next 10 minutes or so. How can we prepare the law enforcement and police in Australia for the onset of automation and AI? You may ask, why do we need to prepare for such a thing? Data analytics have blown up in recent years and yielded amazing insights in basically all other industries. Why can't we just apply the same methods to criminology and expect utopian levels of safety? Well, there are two core issues that arise from improper and rash implementation of AI in policing methods. Issue number one, discrimination of minority groups through biased policing algorithms. Issue number two, with this newfound power, we risk public mistrust in the police due to cases of abuse of power and data privacy concerns. Our strategies to address these issues include a three-pronged approach of inclusivity, education, and social initiatives. Stephanie and Anna will follow my industry and strategy overview and walk you through the specific details of each individual strategy. Afterwards, we will have Harish close with a feasibility analysis outlining why we think the strategy will work. Before we get into the action, here's a little bit about the AI and policing industry. Sources predict that over 40% of police agencies will be using digital tools for investigations by 2022. We've already seen early iterations of predictive models overseas with three primary outcomes for these AI systems. Predicting perpetrators, predicting victims, and predicting the likelihood of crime in a given area at a given time. Any of these three applications seek to improve allocation of police resources, which is something much needed given the steady incline of costs to enforce law in Australia. We've mentioned the points of caution, but if we get this right, we'd be looking at benefiting law enforcement officers in the pursuit of public safety, government officials by reducing the cost of crime on the economy, and all Australians who get to live in a better and safer community. So, how do we plan on doing this? Essentially, we need to ask ourselves, how can we reduce the effects of biases in AI systems and extend the use of AI models to better address social inclusion? This will be achieved by rewiring models and perceptions by consulting a diverse group of experts in the evaluation process, and creating police training modules to educate and inform about biases and limitations of models. Furthermore, We seek to utilize the models for an outcome that involves targeting social programs rather than crime deterrence methods. This will be done in conjunction with established PCYC and youth rehab programs to help strategically address underlying factors causing crime. Overall, we project a 28.8% reduction in false positive convictions, 70,000 officers reached in education programs, surmounting to a 27% return on investment from long-term social initiatives. I will now pass you guys on to Stephanie, who will outline the first of our strategies that will enable the use of automated policing methods in Australia.
Thanks, Alex. So our first strategy focuses on addressing frictions which arise from the onset of using AI and can be split into reducing bias in the models, as well as easing public tension. Reducing model bias can be outlined in 3 steps. First, considering the inputs. These models currently use reported crimes and past conviction records, which are systemically biased against marginalized groups. As evidence suggests, police officers have used bias in determining prior patrols, searches, and reporting disproportionately affecting people of color, poor economic standing, and young people. To ensure inputs are more representative, our research suggests changing police reporting by standardizing their criteria to reduce bias, as well as incorporating environmental characteristics such as education and mental health history to provide a more holistic understanding of the risks involved and remove effects of potential confounding factors. In terms of building the models, it should be built for purposes where the algorithm can be adjusted for existing prejudices. For example, adjusting risk profiles for marginalized groups, designing models to predict crimes that don't correlate heavily with confounding factors like race and economic status, incorporating randomness, or incorporating broader context data sets to reduce bias. Finally, ethical governance and feedback should be maintained by using perspectives outside the statistical realm, including sociologists, economists, and behavioral scientists to ensure decision-making is inclusive, ethical, and fair. The outcomes of this include increased transparency about how predictive policing works, feedback loops to improve algorithm literacy, and potentially 28.8% reduction in racial bias measured through false convictions and incorrect risk ratings. So in terms of the social tensions from implementing predictive policing, previous studies identified 2 main critiques from the public. The first being the lack of transparency, where 96% of citizens want to play a role in police services and 68% feel they do not receive enough information from the police. The second being the lack of accountability, where citizens fear police will solely act on outputs of a potentially biased system. This is evident through studies indicating limited instructions and evaluations given to police about the outputs of the models. So to gain public trust, we recommend producing resources which will address these issues. This involves partnering with the AIPM, a worldwide trusted public safety education organization, local communities, non-government organizations focusing on police accountability, and private organizations which create these softwares. The second step then involves developing and distributing free online resources for the public to ease community concern by increasing transparency of the use of these models. So this would include things like what the system actually is, how it's currently being used, and advocating for the benefits of these models. Then the third step involves creating training modules for the police. This will focus on understanding the key risk factors used by the algorithm, the model limitations due to inherent biases in the data, and emphasizing police accountability based on their actions and not solely on the model outputs. This will allow us to reach 70,000 police officers in Australia, with a 10% potential increase in the understanding of bias on police actions, where 60% of the community support the use of similar training modules to improve police effectiveness. Overall, creating a less biased algorithm, increasing transparency and accountability to ensure minority groups do not feel targeted. I will now pass on to Anna, who will take us through the second part of our strategy.
Thanks, Stephanie. The second half of our strategy focuses on using predictive AI to establish longer-term initiatives to ensure better and targeted social crime prevention. AI models provide the unprecedented capacity to gather data on areas and individuals of high risk. In New South Wales, one existing AI-driven model is the Suspect Target Management Plan. However, the STMP has been found to disproportionately target juveniles and Aboriginal Australians and subject them to heavy-handed and oppressive policing strategies that are detrimental to offender rehabilitation. Instead, there are additional use cases of this technology. From these insights, AI can be used as a tool to connect individuals to appropriate evidence-based programs within the community that best address underlying factors for why they commit crimes. Existing programs have been successfully implemented internationally. In Canada, predictive models were used to connect at-risk individuals to social services and realized a 53% reduction in assaults and a 23% reduction in property crimes. From the United States, initiatives also realized a 51% reduction in violence-related arrests. With law enforcement capabilities strengthened through these data insights, these bodies are placed in a unique position to enact long-term and sustainable change. We will now examine strategy feasibility. We expect that there would be an initial cost of $9 million for the widespread implementation of AI predictive systems in Australia, although AI initiatives are already inevitably merging within the country. Further, an initial $20,000 will be used as the basis of creating the online education modules for police officers and the general public. Lastly, we expect that another $5 million in government funding will be required for the community-led justice reinvestment initiatives. We have also identified performance indicators that would allow us to feasibly measure the success of our strategy. For our inclusive data model, we hope to reduce existing false positives by 28.8%, working to continually reduce any biases present within predictive policing algorithms. For our education-based training modules, we aim to reach 70,000 officers across Australia to ensure a widespread understanding of both bias and accountability when using these tools. With the continued use of predictive policing and redirecting the high-risk profiles to community-led justice initiatives, we aim to reach a 50% reduction in violence-related arrests and see a 27% return on government investment from long-term social initiatives. We have also projected the expected decreases in the number of youth offences after implementing these redirection models of identified medium to high-risk juveniles. Lastly, I will pass on to Harish, who will go through the strategy timeline.
Thanks, Anna. Over the course of the year, we aim to start by addressing algorithmic bias in existing models used in Australia, such as the SDMP's locality and juvenile bias for low-impact crimes, for instance, in Redfern and Orana, following which the police officers' educational modules and long-term implementation of social initiatives and other use cases would be undertaken. With the algorithmic design, the initial reforms in data reporting is estimated to take a few months due to procedural stickiness, whilst the algorithm refinement, ethical governance, and feedback loops being ongoing processes. As for the educational modules, we estimate the creation of these modules to take 3 months in order to collate and condense the vast spectrum of information, including statistical biases, as well as the intricacies of systemic biases against various communities. We recommend running these sessions twice a year to ensure officers are well informed and demonstrate continued professionalism. Finally, the social initiative sees the provision of data to local community organizations thrice a year to ensure updated statistics, with the eventual reduction in police presence following a few months later to allow for the aforementioned initiatives to take effect. Now let's look at the risks of our strategy. There are 3 primary risks with our stakeholders. Firstly, the implementation costs of our solutions are expected to increase, as building an equitable model requires significant commitments from a host of professionals, as well as rigorous data training and experimenting to ensure fairness. Furthermore, there are feasibility concerns in providing widespread social programs across a broad scope of individuals in terms of costs and timing. To mitigate this, we recommend comprehensive preparation and phased rollouts to ensure that costly initiatives aren't wastefully deployed without meeting adequate metrics of success. Next, we expect public-wide pushbacks to the proliferation of predictive policing, with the uncertainty that communities that are selected to undergo these social initiatives would even accept these measures. Furthermore, we also expect pushbacks from police departments who may not accept the changes that are brought about to their current working practices, such as increased transparency into their operations. To mitigate this, we recommend establishing extensive communication efforts and feedback mechanisms between the police, government, community, the public, and professionals to ensure transparency, integrity, and ethics are upheld. In conclusion, we believe the onset of automation in predictive policing is inevitable, but it's imperative to address the inherent biases immediately to ensure a socially and economically inclusive adoption of these technologies. To that effect, we recommend a 3-pronged strategy. Firstly, the model fundamentally needs to be adjusted to eliminate its inherent biases, as well as require significant oversight from professionals and regulatory bodies to ensure the effects of prejudice data are contained. Secondly, educational modules to inform police officers of the limitations as well as addressing the accountability of their actions is imperative to optimally utilize predictive policing models. Finally, utilizing the data to address the latent factors motivating at-risk individuals to commit crime would prove to augment long-term sustainability in crime aversion, as opposed to the short-run effects of crime deterrence of the actions of at-risk individuals. These strategies in tandem should ensure a reduction in racial bias, a 27% ROI from long-term social initiatives, and a reduction in violence-related arrests amongst at-risk individuals. Ultimately, we understand the limitations and concerns surrounding predictive policing, but we like to see this as an opportunity to increase the trust, engagement, and safety between the police and the community in light of already strained relationships, because whilst equity is subjective, it is imperative. We thank you for your attention and this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Team 50. That was a fantastic presentation. I'll now turn to our panel. Yeah, Ed.
As I understood, you were outlining a system that really picked up what Bill Simpson-Young said right at the start, which is the best of human and the best of artificial intelligence. So you talked about the role for sociologists, ethicists, and so on in the decision-making process. I wonder if you can expand a bit on that. What specific role would they have, and how would you ensure that, you know, their perspective is actually being integrated into the system effectively?
Yep, happy to take that question. So like we had mentioned, you're right in addressing the fact that equity is subjective. That's why we need to bring on these professionals and to expand on how they would input into the development of the actual model. So there were studies where behavioral scientists, as well as economists, came in to address how we should adjust risk profiles based on these confounding factors. So possibly assigning offsetting risk profiles, adjusting scales, addressing that the heuristics of the actual criminals and their convictions would ensure a more holistic perspective. So basically assisting statisticians and data scientists to develop statistical models that provide a more equitable solution. Like I said, assigning a degree of randomness, assigning a risk-adjusted scale for marginalized groups who are subjected to marginalized conditions. That would sort of help develop a more holistic and ethical perspective for the model.
Leslie?
Yeah, thanks. And again, thank you. It's impressive and learn so much each time. Do you have a basic assumption that AI is smarter than the cop on the beat?
I can take this one. So as we've seen in other industries, the short answer is yes. AI will be able to pick up on patterns that exist within the data that a human just simply cannot. However, we have put this much effort into erring on the side of caution because we also understand that although they can see stuff we cannot, there's aspects that only a human can judge. It's very hard to build the perfect model that accounts for both discrimination and makes sure everything is just and right. So what we're trying to do is utilize the parts of AI, which is identifying patterns within behavior and within the data that will benefit the police, as well as using the judgment of experts and community engagement to overall make sure it is the correct judgment.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think the primary point, like he mentioned, was there are certain things that humans cannot pick up on. Whereas, for example, if you set in these, there's empirical evidence that cops use prejudice judgments and biases to make simple decisions like stop and searches, deciding who and how to report crimes. And the thing is, whilst cops in their minds, they're set in these ways because there's a traditional system of doing things and there's a traditional set way to make those judgments, the AI would be able to address these biases by making them aware of these biases in the first place. So it's as much as it's about thinking whether the AI is smarter than the human or the human is smarter than the AI, it's also about addressing, it's also about questioning current ways of things and if they're actually equitable. Hopefully that adds to it.
Great, thanks.
Yep, Charlie, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, I again, congratulations. Another really challenging industry with complex, very complex issues to deal with. I really like the fact that you brought out those international examples and you showed some before, which, in these industries where there's the sort of high consequences of things going wrong, I think really help. And you mentioned Canada. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how far that got and has that sort of scaled nationally, or can you say more about where that's got to in terms of the support also amongst the community and the police force?
Sure, so I can take that. So in Canada, there was a case study that occurred with connecting at-risk individuals to social services, and it saw a 53% reduction in assaults and 23% reduction in property crimes. I'm not too sure in terms of if it has continued, but it is a promising case study in terms of something that we can kind of take and implement that into our own systems. But I think Alex had something to add as well.
Yeah, so in our research, we did look at Canada, but I don't think we looked too much into what that meant in terms of if it's scaled nationally. However, one other country example, which we did do extensive research on, was the US. And I'm pretty sure Predictive is quite a well-known program that has been tried in the US. At first, it saw a 27% reduction in arrest. And so from, I think it was Santa Cruz, they rolled it out as a national program off the basis of the success that it saw in the small localized trial.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Team 50. It was a fantastic presentation. In the interest of time, I'd like to now invite Team 21 in order to present, and feel free to let me know whenever you're ready to start the time.
Before we begin, I would like to inform that our fourth team member, Jeremy, he has a commitment on at the same time, so he couldn't make it to the finals. Good morning, judges. My name is Idea, and I'm joined by my team member, Kayla, Jeremy, and Julia, to represent Apollo Advisory. Today, we will present to you a national strategy aimed to address automation within retail industry as one of many facets of the Australian economy that has been greatly impacted by automation uptake. A growing divide between employees and employers has heightened from the knowledge gap that exists because of adopted automation processes and poor supporting infrastructure. Furthermore, the retail industry has endured a large automation horizon shift between the procurement stage and the customer satisfaction. This results in many Australian retailers being forgotten, while competition with automation capabilities drive the technological-driven economy. Firstly, Apollo Advisory recommends the adoption of Retail Talk, which aims to tackle the uncertainty and lack of outlets available for employees to voice their concern, such as job loss. And Retail Learn provides engaging learning modules that assist in bridging the knowledge gap. Secondly, Retail Mate is a retailer e-marketplace that exclusively connects small retailers with small supply chain entities with automation capabilities, therefore creating a robust and supportive network to achieve automation advantages. Retail Talk and Learn achieve social inclusivity by reaching over 135,000 retailers and $14.5 million estimated profit. Retail Mate strongly targets 34,000 small retailers, yielding $3.4 million in profit to ensure economic inclusivity.
Now, the growing retail industry has been significantly affected by automation transformation within Australia. This has been evidenced in four main facets of business. Firstly, strong e-commerce growth has led to mass closure of physical stores by larger outlets. Secondly, technology-driven supply chain retailers are prompted to better meet demand. automation is being integrated within marketing and checkout processes, whilst income inequality, regulations, and unprofitability pressures have led to job losses. Small retailers contribute largely to the Australian economy, with promising growth going from 1.98 million to 2.4 million, a 21.3% increase between 2015 and 2021. There are several pillars within the retail industry which have adopted automation into their practices, which in turn has boosted productivity growth for retailers. These include online inventory management, staff and task management, and intuitive CRM software. Now, the industry faces an increasing pressure to create value across the supply chain, whether it be at the supplier, distribution centre, retail outlet, or consumer levels. When done efficiently, this can lead to productivity growth, increased customer satisfaction, and sustainable competitive edge for retailers. The industry's performance in adapting to automation is undermined by three main issues affecting the workplace and supply chain. Due to the prevalence of automation technologies, there are increases in job losses and subsequently rising tensions with regard to job security. In turn, this can lead to an increase in industrial disputes, which detrimentally affects the productivity of retail businesses in an already competitive market. The knowledge gap surrounding automation systems and their impact means that employees lack the requisite skills required for future workplaces. In effect, this can contribute to income inequality within the industry and a loss of business productivity. Smaller and local businesses have limited ability to access automation technologies, which results in an inability to capitalize on the resources of larger suppliers, a privilege afforded by larger retailers. This could lead to larger retailers gaining monopoly power within the market. As each of these issues has a material impact on the future performance of the retail industry, they must be addressed through a structured plan.
In order to address these problems, Retail Now is a strategy that we have developed consisting of 3 key modules. By launching an online forum called Retail Talk and an education platform under Retail Learn, it allows employees to not only voice their concerns, but also improve their skill set in automation software. Alongside this, Retail Mate connects businesses together through an e-marketplace to support their endeavors. By taking a holistic approach, our solution focuses on the feasibility of implementation in the retail industry to ignite brand reputation and competitive edge. It is imperative to analyze which stakeholders are being impacted by retail automation. At the low level, employees may feel a sense of uncertainty and fear. This increases the number of disputes and decreases the productivity of workers, which results in a ripple effect. The organizational culture is adversely impacted, and there is a stronger need for workers to have proficient skills in using these automation software. Retail Talk and Retail Learn addresses these pain points at the low and medium level. For the governments, it is more difficult for small businesses to access automation technology, which impacts small retailers. So Retail Mate provides the opportunity for these local retailers to grow and better access automation technology. These issues are also demonstrated through the case studies of Coles and Amazon.
Automation increases workers' fear of job loss, posing threats on potential protests. Retail Talk is an online platform for employees to voice their concern and managers to host monthly surveys to analyze employee satisfaction. Features in this platform include quantitative questions to assess employees' outlook on threats of losing their job, importance of their job, and their powerlessness to maintain jobs. Visualization software is utilized to generate better insights, and a centralized database will store employee satisfaction score across multiple branches of the retail store. We believe that it is important to identify issues and address them early. Coles is an example of a retailer who can utilize our service. First, Coles subscribes to our Retail Talk platform. Then employees are required to complete monthly surveys. Participation will be mandated by retail managers of each branch. To keep the surveys anonymous, managers will have access to participation rate, but not the response. Then, data will be stored in a centralized database where human resource department can view performance of different branches. Visualization software such as Tableau or Power BI can be used to aid understanding and generate better insights. If a concern is raised, depending on the severity of the issue, the HRM department can either raise concern to government bodies or other business departments. Business models from branches that are performing well can be applied to those that are struggling.
Following this, the second strand of Retail Now aims to equip retail workers with skills due to automation technology. This is critical to bridge the knowledge gap that retailers currently face. As an online learning platform, Retail Learn provides training courses to upskill employees. Each course is broken down into smaller modules that are easily digestible to improve both generic skills and target particular automation software. A verified digital certificate is provided at the completion of the course to recognize workers' proficiency in retail automation. A leaderboard will also be embedded on the website with a point system to encourage engagement with the modules. The roadmap seen on the slide starts off with consulting retailers through surveys to gather insights into common automation technology that employees are interested in learning. The retailers can then sign up to Retail Learn and enroll in a free training course first, then upgrade to standard and premium subscriptions to unlock more courses. These are developed by the Australian government, automation software companies, and workforce leaders with prior knowledge in the industry. In this way, courses will be customized to the needs of the retailer to bridge their workers' skill gap in automation systems. Our strategy will also pull together businesses with similar interests so they will be able to access the same courses. Having employers being able to monitor the progress of their workers as they progress through the course is unique to our platform and ensures engagement with the modules. As automation is constantly evolving, retail workers will need to update their skills and renew their knowledge of the course content as specified by their employer. At a minimum, employers should conduct yearly check-ins to ensure competence in automation technology.
The third pillar of our solution addresses the issue where local retailers have limited access to automation. This limits the economies of scale and slow down growth. RetailMate is a B2B marketplace aiming to connect local retailers with suppliers who have capabilities in automation. Through RetailMate, local retailers can browse for the cheapest manufacturing option to meet their needs. They can discover services from smaller automation software providers who offer cheaper solutions, but are not as well known as larger software providers like SAP, Salesforce, and IBM. They can also benefit from collaboration with other retailers who share similar needs to gain economies of scale. Tree of Life is an example of a local clothing store that wishes to produce 500 dresses and 100 shirts. Their willingness to pay is $5 per dress and $3 per shirt. Bob, a manufacturer who has capability in automation, he can produce dress at a cost of $5 per dress. This meets Trees of Life needs. However, Bob is only able to manufacture shirts at a cost of $3 if 200 shirts are bought. The needs aren't satisfied, so Tree of Life can leave the wish on the RetailMate's wish list. At the same time, ColorCo also wants to produce 100 shirts at $3 per shirt. RetailMate's algorithm will pair retailers like Tree of Life and ColorCo together and notify them. They will collaborate and utilize Bob's service in order to produce a product with costs matching their willingness to pay.
As a national strategy, key stakeholders include individuals, businesses, and the government must be greatly accounted for to mitigate potential complications and determine any implications that may arise from Retail Now. For individuals, the strategy mainly concerns employees who will be engaging with the learning modules and workplace forum. This largely benefits them at both a technical level, where new skills are learned from Retail Learn, and at a mental health level, where employees feel valued through a transparent medium to voice their concerns. A simple reward system will accompany the platform to encourage staff to engage with content and unlock benefits. The businesses concerned with our strategy are small businesses and retailers who are encouraged to market the program to their employees upon subscribing and will benefit from the exclusive network of the RetailMate platform. This enables cost-saving advantages and intra-workplace data gathering to help cater strategies and respond to employee disputes in a more streamlined manner. Lastly, to ensure national expansion and reach, the government will assist Retail Now through grants and subsidized marketing costs to ensure visibility, which has been a recent government initiative. Further, the local governments across Australia, including trade unions, will be a large asset to ensure retailers are aware of the program. A percentage of potential revenues that are generated can be provided to the government for their initial assistance as the program launches.
To ensure that Retail Now is viable, feasible, and sustainable as a national strategy, the relevant costs and revenue streams have been carefully considered. The Retail Talk and Retail Learn platform is estimated to generate $26.4 million in revenue, while the Retail Mate platform has a projected revenue of $3.7 million in 2022, being its first year of operation. From the second year onwards, it is projected that the Retail Now suite will generate $14.5 million in profit. As a strong differentiator and attractive feature, Retail Now provides enormous opportunity in the economic and social spheres. By connecting smaller retailers with smaller suppliers through the Retail Mate B2B marketplace, the platform responds to the growing and important contribution of small Australian businesses to the economy. Reaching smaller retailers that are often forgotten when considering retail automation will ensure productivity growth and favourable profitability increases. By fostering social cohesion within the workplace, retailers are able to upskill their employees by igniting a positive and transparent culture that accompanies the improvement of employee outcomes given the knowledge gap is addressed. This provides an improved brand image for retailers that lack the financial and human capital to market their product and have low visibility relative to their larger competitors. This will further drive profitability. The cycle aims to alleviate the inaccessibility and poor understanding of automation processes within the workplace to ultimately achieve social and economic inclusivity within Australia. The three-part strategy can be implemented over the short-term timeframe of 3 years. Stages consist primarily of software development, surveys to collect retailer data, and business outreach, combined with close monitoring of feedback and retail-specific impacts of automation trends in Australia. In order to respond to risks, Retail Now should implement mitigation strategies. With the risk of lack of employer and employee uptake with the Retail Talk Forum, this can be addressed through education of customers through marketing and thorough market testing conducted prior. Lack of engagement with Retail Learn can be mitigated through scheduled reviews of participant progress to identify any pain points and evaluate the effectiveness of incentives. Difficulty with ensuring content is up to date with automation standards can be lessened by regular monitoring of automation trends through scheduled yearly and niche-dependent check-ins. Therefore, through Retail Talk, Retail Learn, and Retail Mate, an effective national strategy can be rolled out to ensure that key issues within the retail industry driven by the growing automation trend can be addressed. Together, these solutions will bring a strong financial, social, and economic impact, catering to the needs of stakeholders on low, medium, and high levels. Through Retail Now, it's clear that the future of retail is now. Thank you. We're now open to questions.
Thank you, Team 21. Luke?
Yeah, this is an interesting topic because definitely we're seeing our clients move into automation rapidly, particularly in their distribution centres, as online's rapidly become more popular, thanks to COVID pushing it along as well. Do you see, I saw in your sort of strategy, it was probably maybe a little bit at the end, like that sort of thinking, but do you think bringing forward, I guess, the way that the distribution centres are working and introducing automation probably in that area will be probably the first kind of key area to tackle, and then kind of bring in automation in some of the other areas through the delivery lifecycle?
That is a very good question. Thank you for your question. So I do agree with you that there's a growing demand for automation in the logistics side of retail for sure. However, our strategy, we do consider that as kind of like a separate branch just for now. We want to focus on our strategy in upskilling staff, connecting local retailers with suppliers, and giving a channel where staff can voice their concern. Therefore, in terms of distribution channel, we have considered it, but our team view it something that's separate to our proposed strategy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, question from Charlie. So obviously, lots happening in this space. So really exciting space to look at, particularly accelerated by with COVID. In terms of sort of getting momentum sort of quickly behind this one, my guess is it would have to come more from the private sector, or the expectation there'd be private sector sort of investment in something like this, if over time it's to attract government interest as well. Are there particular sort of venture capital or tech platform players that you think might be particularly interested in this sort of a venture, or investing in this sort of a venture?
Amazing question again. In terms of our strategy, I will break them down into individual ones. For retail talk, we can definitely utilize on existing startups that works closely with surveys collection, like Google Forms and stuff like that. But then we'll need more research to find a more specific startups who can help, or technology that can assist us with that. In terms of retail learn, there's online platform like LinkedIn Learning and Udemy that has grown significantly a lot over the past decades. So we can definitely utilize those platforms to help assist us in retail learn. In terms of retail mate, back in 10 decades ago, Alibaba started a B2B strategy as well. And they have grown significantly over the past 20 years, and now the industry is worth billions of dollars. Therefore, we can definitely utilize them in terms of consulting services for them to come and help us, guide us to build a more holistic and a complete solution for retail mate.
Thank you.
Awesome. If there are no more questions from the panel, I'd like to thank Team 21 for the amazing presentation. Now what we're going to do is we're going to assign the judges into breakout rooms. And while we do that, we are going to announce the Accenture Mini Challenge winners from the actual program this week. So we'll sort of assign the judges now, and then we'll get to the break portion of the event for tonight. Yep, so to our judges, we've opened up the breakout rooms. Awesome. And so for all the participants from the mini challenges this week, we are very excited to announce the teams who have won. And the Tech for Social Good team had an amazing time sort of first watching a scavenger hunt sheet, reading a scavenger hunt sheet. It was lots of good fun. So in terms of the first challenge, we'd like to announce the winners, Team 38, congratulations. Team 21 and Team 15, fantastic job. And then in terms of the second mini challenge, which was the introductory video for the teams, we'd like to congratulate Team 51 and Team 48. We'll be messaging you with further details. Now, as the judges sort of deliberate the winner, we'll have around a 10 to 15 minute break. And then after that, the judges will sort of announce the winners, and we'll move on to the Q&A question panel, where you guys get to ask these amazing panelists burning questions you have about the automation industry.
Hey everyone, thank you for being patient with us. I hope we didn't keep you too long. Firstly, we just wanted to say the judges are incredibly all very impressed with the amount of thought, effort and work you've put into these issues. I think for all of us, we gained some insight into a space, and yeah, the amount of research and detail was amazing. So yeah, I'll announce our winners, and then I'll go to Leslie and Luke for a bit of overall feedback. So in third place, we have the health team. Sorry, I will give you the numbers because I know that's not, so that was Team 1. And yeah, with that, I think we just saw what a huge issue that was to tackle. And so amazing work. And then in second, we have the retail team. Again, an issue that is, happening, and you guys, the insight that you provided into that was amazing, and the stakeholder engagement we were quite impressed with. And then drum roll, I'll do my own here. I hope you're all doing it wherever you are. The team that came in first place is Team 50 on predictive policing, and we just, I think the presentation, the sort of the way you guys did the slides and how you introduced each one of you and your role in it, yeah, we were quite blown away by, and I think I'll leave it at that. But firstly, congratulations to all the teams. This was such an amazing way to spend our Friday afternoons. I hope you gained something from this experience. I know I did. I'm going to hand it to Leslie and Luke for some more feedback and just overall feedback. So over to you, Leslie.
Thanks very much. Let me second that. It has been really just a terrific and very educational afternoon. And particularly, I think it surprised all the panel when we were told you were only given this problem definition a week ago. So the fact that you all put together such insightful and articulate presentations, so well researched, is really unbelievable, frankly, and we really appreciate it. And if you can do that in a week, it'd be incredible what you could do even further. So I just so your level of research was all very, very high quality. You tackled some very, very important issues. You thought through carefully kind of the technological piece as well as a wider piece. And you all were really clear on where you saw the benefits. And so those were all very strong across them. And I'm sure as you think about automation and technology in the space of social good, there's just a few things that I would encourage you to continue to think very clearly about. One is stakeholders and the complexity of stakeholders that sit around these sorts of decisions that are made to whether to automate or not, and how that automation looks, how it's designed, how it's rolled out, the kind of nuance and complexity around stakeholders is quite significant. Related to that is the sort of implementation and downstream effect of automation and technology. So there's emerging evidence that small tests, pilots, lots and lots of feedback before rolling out across the board is quite important, and involving frontline employees, if that's the case, in the design and implementation process, and then making sure there's some sort of mechanism for the unintended consequence and how that is dealt with. And the last thing I'll say is there's a little bit of emerging research that there's deference to the machine, and that even when people are told this is just a suggestion, this is just input, there can be this over time a deference to, well, the data or the automated response must be correct. And that is just an interesting space when you think about ethical dimensions. So I would just leave it at that but again, really well done. And thank you so much.
Thanks, Leslie. And I guess a few comments from myself before we move on to the Q&A section. Having rolled out automation, I definitely concur with what Leslie was saying there around the challenges of getting the adoption. I think getting the psychology understood, as well as the to be, I guess, operating model when you include automation is really important, because if you don't think through that, there can be unintended consequences. An interesting example was we started to measure and introduce automation into one of the large retailers on how shopping was picked, and we included a lot of automation in that process. And but what we didn't really think about was the consequences of the psychology of how people would go about picking. And in fact, they started to change the way that they were picking originally to a completely different process, which actually in turn was less effective. But the automation was still effective, but the way that the process changed was ineffective. So yeah, you do need to consider the unintended consequences. And then think through that change management, the re-education, because I think that's extremely important, which I think a lot of the presentations did think about and consider, because I think that's really where we need to spend a lot of time in our community, and that will really make, I think, automation really far more impacting if we can engage the community to really embrace the automation, but use it in a positive way to, as sort of the original keynote speaker spoke about, moving towards just taking away the mundane work and really focusing on where people add the most value. And I think that's the, I guess, the key objective we should all have. So yeah, thank you for doing such wonderful presentations.
Cool. Well, thank you so much to the judges and the participants for really delivering such wonderful presentations. So it's been a really long 2 hours, and I think everyone definitely deserves a quick break. So I reckon let's come back at around 4:05, and then we can resume with the Q&A panel. Cool. Well, welcome back, everyone. So right now we're going to be headed off to the Q&A part of this National Automation Forum. And the way the Q&A panel will be structured is around for the first 40 or so minutes, we'll have structured questions, questions that have been prepared by Tech Associate Gun for the judges. And then afterwards, we'll open up the Q&A to the entire floor. So before we get stuck into the questions, maybe if each of the judges would like to give like a really quick self-introduction about maybe some interesting experiences you have, your background, and what automation means to you. So who would like to go first?
Alphabetical order, maybe.
Yep, cool. So I think that's Charlie.
Hi, sure. I'm happy to go first. So Charlie Taylor, so worked in McKinsey for 30 years or so just retired as a full-time partner last year, and worked across many industries, both here, up in Asia, and in the US. And I particularly got interested in automation, more partly because of my sort of background as an economist and some of the work I'd done on the impact of the internet boom around 2000, 2001, and research looking at why the sort of computer sector, the lag that took in terms of coming through in terms of productivity. But McKinsey itself got very involved in look at the opportunity associated with automation over the last decade in particular. And both Sechkin and I together wrote a report on Australia's automation opportunity. It's a couple of years ago now, but I think it's still very relevant. In fact, some of it's been accelerated by the trends of COVID, and we can talk a bit more about that in terms of the questions. But we would certainly see it over the next 10 to 30 years as really key to being able to support our ongoing prosperity in the context of an aging nation. And looked quite a lot at some of the, how to address some of the challenges associated with automation. But we'll come back to that as part of the questions. But that's where my interests come from.
Cool. So I think right next on the list is Ed.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ed Santo. I'm the industry professor responsible for technology at UTS. Until very recently, I was the Australian Human Rights Commissioner. And that's perhaps the role where I became most interested in automation and the use of AI. We did a big project on human rights and technology with a final report that was released just a few months ago. I guess what we see with automation is kind of the best and worst of new tech. We can see with something like what came to be known as robo-debt, that if you get a system wrong, it can go wrong at scale very quickly. And I guess what we're trying to do is learn the lessons from experiences like that, because the consequences in terms of injustice and indeed human rights violation can be truly catastrophic if we do get those things wrong. But taking off my black hat, putting it much more positively, I'm really interested in if we do take those lessons about how systems that integrate automation can be done, can be used in ways that engage positively our rights, that bake in accountability protections, then you can get greater efficiency and more data-driven decision making. So that's it for me.
Fantastic. And I might pass it on to Janani.
Hey everyone, my name is Janani. I'm a senior project officer here at the Sydney Policy Lab. And I consider myself to come from an organising perspective. I started as a community organiser straight out of uni, and then have found myself in policy spaces and spent my last year at the Community and Public Sector Union as a researcher and the submission writer. And I guess when I think about automation, and I definitely come from a public sector worker perspective, because that's when I first ever kind of considered those big questions. And that was because we had, at the Community and Public Sector Union, we had members who worked at Centrelink and were experiencing sort of the backlash of robo-debt. And I think that's the first time I kind of contemplated this big policy issue. And for me, I think similar to what Ed was speaking about, and I do the report as well, spoke to that, and I definitely recommend looking at it, and was that, you know, the idea of government regulation and how, I guess, government considers these questions is big. And I think working with workers on the ground, seeing kind of, obviously, as you addressed in one of those presentations, the fear of automation, but also allowing, and that's why I think that retail presentation spoke about employee input quite well. And that's the sort of perspective I like to bring to these conversations. Thank you.
Fantastic. So I might pass it on to Leslie.
Vincent, would it be possible not to look at a discussion panel screen share and be able to see faces a little bit? All right. I just have a terrible bias towards the human. I'm sorry. Anyway, hello, everybody. So I have spent a good portion of my career in the US and worked for a trade union, worked for a small public interest organization, originally started by Eleanor Roosevelt, actually, and worked in the US Congress and culminated in being appointed by President Clinton to a role in his administration, working with Bob Reich, for anybody who knows his writings. Came here, my partner's Australian, so we came here, and I found myself for the first time in my life sitting in a bureaucratic role inside the New South Wales Education Department. And much to my surprise, I learned to love it. Amongst other things, had responsibility for national policy, and got to work on closely with David Gonski, for example, in redesigning the school funding system to make it more equitable. My interest in this space started back in 2016 and was principally motivated by the quite substantial impact that automation is going to have on work, as the premise of this challenge is, or the framing included, and the implications that would have for what education needs to do to change. That led to various things around curriculum and building an in-house innovation lab. I've left the department, and I was very grateful to get a fellowship from the Paul Ramsey Foundation, which I am using to pick up on Ed's point, to look at how tools, AI augmented tools, actually can lift outcomes for disadvantaged students. Not being naive about all the risks, but actually looking at how that capacity for personalization could lift the outcomes for those who often get overlooked.
Cool, thank you so much for that. I might pass on to Luke. So I think Luke might potentially be a bit busy right now, so maybe we could go quickly to Seckin and then I'll try and come back to Luke.
No problem. Hi, everyone. I'm Seckin Nguru. I'm a partner at McKinsey & Company. I started my career actually as a forensic psychologist, working in a drug prison, and really motivated by helping people, really understanding criminal behaviour and doing my part to help. While I was there, though, what I realised was I was actually really more interested in sort of systemic impact, being able to help people at that societal level, and which is what got me into policy. And I worked in various policy roles at the Department of Premier and Cabinet, looking after justice policy, health policy, social policy. I then worked at the Royal Commission into child abuse, which was sort of my once in a lifetime opportunity to put the forensic psych degree to use. But after that, that did leave me a little bit traumatized, I must say, and I needed an escape, but I still wanted to do policy work. So I delved into the realm of economic policy and went to the Department of Industry, where the government at the time was setting up a job creation agency called Jobs for New South Wales. And there I was head of strategy, and we were looking at how do we create long-term economic growth and jobs specifically for New South Wales, especially in light of the challenges that were being posed by automation, the disruption to different industries, etc. And that's actually where I met Charlie, who recruited me into McKinsey. So since joining, I've had the opportunity to pursue this passion to learn more about automation, its impacts, specifically in the public sector space for me. I do a lot of work with large government organisations looking at how automation is going to impact the public service, how do we reskill more broadly, and I also have a passion for education, so that's how Leslie and I know each other. For me, I think the biggest thing that excites me at the moment is how can we actually use automation to improve the citizen experience? Often, when the conversation, I just don't think we're talking about it enough, by the way, but when we do talk about it, it's all about all the jobs that are going to disappear. And, as our research shows, actually, there's a lot more jobs that, could be created. But for me, the exciting part is, how can you actually take, those people who are in jobs that, a machine could probably do better, reskill them into roles where they're going to be delivering a much better experience, whether that's, for customers in the private sector or for citizens in the public sector. And so, the easiest sort of example that comes to mind is something like, tax. If you look at, how, for those of you, you're all too young, but some of us on the panel will remember, it used to take hours to do your tax return, or, you had to go and use an accountant because it was so complex. And now you can do it in 5 minutes because all the information is sort of pre-filled. You get all these little alerts about, you sure you want to enter that? People in a similar situation to you have entered very different data to you. You might want to reconsider. So I'm really excited by the use of the technology for that kind of, better outcome, both, for consumers, but also for society more broadly.
Fantastic, Seckin. So I think Luke right now might be a bit unresponsive. So we might move on to the structured Q&A part of this presentation. So I guess the first question is, So how exactly is this new wave of automation different to previous types of technological innovation? And we're talking about like in the 90s with the rise of the computer and even earlier. So what exactly is different about this? And I think a good place to start potentially might be with Setkin and Charlie, both of whom co-authored the McKinsey report into Australia's automation opportunity.
Setkin?
Oh, look, I think it's different in that it's affecting all industries. Previously, we saw a big impact on, say, the manufacturing industry or, the retail industry. Now, you just can't escape it. It's impacting absolutely, every sector in unanticipated ways sometimes. There's debates about, is the speed of change faster than what we saw before? I think it is. I think it's accelerated now because of COVID, which is actually really exciting because I think it gives us the opportunity to adopt automation, much more quickly and realize the potential that automation can deliver. Much earlier than what we had anticipated even in our report, where we had different scenarios. We were looking at sort of technology that currently exists that just isn't being used, right? It's not being adopted for various reasons. One of those reasons being so societal sort of acceptance of things like telehealth, for example, just kind of seen as can't be done, all sorts of hurdles. And yet when COVID hit, it got taken up and we saw it is possible. There are many examples like that where I think COVID has, accelerated it further. But I think it's because the potential is there for this technology to really be adopted very quickly and across just a broad range of industries, including white-collar professions that weren't really impacted by previous technological advances. Charlie, did you want to add?
Yeah, the only things I'd add, first of all, I mean, there's a lot the same in the sense of, going back to the steam engine, many technologies over centuries. I mean, this is something that we've learned a lot about as societies, but I think it's a few things that are different. One is that the faster pace and broader set of new technologies that are in place. Secondly, I would say to some extent the economic necessity driven by if we want to keep it, sort of advancing, growing, prosperity across and inclusive prosperity across the nation, given an aging nation, and right now it's a particular challenge with the border restrictions and that are creating real issues around supply in terms of the workforce that actually are creating more of an imperative right now. As well. I think the other thing that's different is that government and sectors that are funded by government are becoming an increasing share of the economy steadily over time. Health and education, etc. And I think there are particular challenges associated. Partly because of the tight nature of the service provision, partly because of the complexity of the stakeholders involved in automating within those types of sectors. So I think those are some of the if you like, additional opportunities and challenges associated with this, the current round of automation that we're seeing going on right now. The one thing I think it's important to say is that, if we look out for the next 30 years or so, it's possible to see how we can do this without increasing unemployment. If we go beyond that, it starts to get more challenging because of what automation potentially could do. And, we go back to a famous quote from John Maynard Keynes, who was, potentially looking at the 10-hour work week back in his time. Now we've gone down to the sort of 40 or 30 work week. If we look over 50 or 100 years, then we get into a much more complex set of challenges about how we as humans want to spend our time. But I think for the next, 30 years or so, that won't be a particular issue.
Cool. So if the rest of the panel doesn't have anything to add on to that, maybe we could move on to the next question. So the next question really talks about, I guess, like the perception that automation will be displacing jobs and potentially reinforcing greater inequality within society. And as we've seen with some technological innovations, I think one perception is that with this displacement of jobs, people will be losing income, will be losing their livelihoods. And I think the question is, how exactly can government manage this transition and ensure that the benefits of automation are really shared evenly across society?
I'm happy to take a stab at that one. So I guess there are a couple of issues bound up in there. The first is about the future of work. You know, a few years ago, I came across someone who kind of retold the story of the Luddites from a more accurate historical perspective. I, like many people, just understood the word Luddite as someone who basically feared technological change. But the true story of the Luddites is really interesting. It essentially was a group of people in a previous industrial revolution who were kind of involved in the manufacture of textiles in England, who suddenly their work was being completely disrupted by the creation of new machines to do what they were doing. What they were calling for was not the destruction of these new machines, nor even the destruction of the factories in which they were now expected to kind of work, but rather a just transition. In other words, support in helping them kind of transition towards, you know, a new kind of working world in which I guess they worked, you know, alongside and tended to machines. And I think, you know, broadly speaking, that's what people have always wanted and probably will always want. And so it's about managing a transition where you help people to skill up. You get a better sense of how you can value sort of the things that we humans are particularly good at, and you know, identify things that are more appropriately done or more effectively done by machines. But you know, the costs and benefits won't be evenly distributed across the community, and so nor should the support be evenly distributed. In other words, those people who are most negatively affected, and also those people who are least able to protect themselves against those negative impacts, need to be given kind of extra support in, as I say, transitioning to what new jobs look like. And I'm a realist, like I think Charlie is as well, that for some people it's going to be incredibly difficult. But there's a lot that can be done to soften that transition.
I don't have too much more to add, but and that's why I waited for Ed to speak first, because I think the report that the Human Rights Commission launched when Ed was there really spoke to that effective government regulation. And the part that I particularly thought was important and considered, you know, more vulnerable communities was the section around how we account for people with disabilities. And I think talking about, I think it was like the disability ministers, I forgot what the actual title of that forum is, but, you know, ensuring that throughout government strategy is not just, you know, purely in one sector. And I think at a minimum, the story that I think always will sit with me is around the sort of, you know, the way that the car manufacturing sector was absolutely trashed, really. And I think, you know, some of you guys would be pretty young. I was pretty young when it happened, but I think reflecting on it, just the complete, you know, the stories are still going in places like Geelong, where I think there was a Ford manufacturing space was. And I think those stories on the ground of people who, yeah, just haven't had the opportunity since. And I think what I'm seeing now is at least, and this kind of speaks to that first question, is when automation does come up, it is a more nuanced conversation about all the stakeholders and people who would be affected, like especially employees. So I think, there's a lot being done in this space, but it's more about actually how is the government being on the forefront of this, really. I do think traditionally, and we've seen it with even just how we're tackling with platform misinformation, we've been on the back foot. And I think it's about government strategy looking at technology and being on the forefront. And I think that's a whole lobbying piece. It's a whole which ministers will listen, and there's a bit of government relations to look into that, but it is putting that at the forefront of our our elected representatives.
Fantastic, cool. So I guess we might move on to the next question, which is, so what industries in Australia do you think will be disrupted most by automation?
I'm happy to just say a few things. This probably goes a bit beyond my kind of remit. So the obvious places to look are where investment is happening now, and where investment is most likely to happen into the future in terms of what logically makes sense. So investment now, the three top industries or sectors, as I understand it, are mining or extractive industries, and then financial services and insurance, and government. None of those things should really shock us. The mining industry is a really interesting one because it's not an area that I know in enormous detail, but a big part of automation there is really about stopping the employment of humans, right? It works best, I think, from their perspective, when you employ as few humans as possible. It's not it is black and white. It's not complicated. So that's really interesting. Whereas that's not so much the case in some of the other sectors. And then, what's ripe for automation? Well, I guess it's thinking about tasks that work well with a kind of an algorithmic process. So tasks for which the answer to a question tends to be a binary one, right? There's a right or wrong answer. Those things tend to work quite well with automation, or at least can. And by contrast, tasks that, to use a kind of a $3 term here, are polycentric. In other words, tasks where there's a range of possible outcomes. There's not a clear right or wrong answer, and it may require the exercise of sort of what we consider to be quintessentially human judgment to determine which is the best of a range of answers. Those are the things that may be kind of less susceptible to automation. But the last thing I would say is the World Economic Forum did an analysis on this. And I'm going to flip it and say, what was the profession or the kind of job that was least likely to be kind of disrupted by automation and AI and so on? The answer was choreography, which leaves me very, very kind of susceptible to being automated out of existence, because that is not playing to my strong suit.
Sorry to hear, Ed, you're challenged on that front, as I am as well. This question we actually looked at in quite some, in a bit of detail in this report that we did, where we used the sort of methodology that McKinsey developed globally to look across all the different industries and to actually estimate, based on existing technologies and the adoption curves that we sort of estimated based on what stage of adoption they were, how quickly they would, the tasks would be automated, because it's not like in most cases, it's not whole jobs going, it's parts of jobs with tasks being automated. So both the ones that came out the top at around the 35% mark were over the next up till 2030 or so, from 2015, were transportation and warehousing, accommodation, food servicing, manufacturing, sort of retail trade. Construction was sort of getting up there as well. So those were the ones that had the biggest change, but you could argue that they're sort of well in progress as well. The ones that had the least were ones where more related to some of the human services like education, which was around 15%, and health and social assistance at around 20%. So that was the range. And in terms of where the jobs, we also looked at where the jobs potentially created, through the things like aging, for example, and lots of demand in the health and social assistance space, and quite a lot of demand in the education space for the retraining as well. So in our report, you'll actually see an analysis from a sort of industry perspective as to where we can see the jobs coming and going from.
Cool. So I guess in the interest of time, maybe we can move on to the next question, which is really just about like the skill shortage gap. And I think like right now there's a huge emphasis on STEM skills, a huge emphasis on being able to code, being able to write computer programs. So I guess the question is, how can all sectors of society, when we're talking about the government, industry, and the public service, how can sectors of society work together to really address the skills shortage in, I guess, new age or new digital skills?
I wonder if Leslie, I'd be
Leslie in section.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to disagree with the assumption.
Yeah.
So, yes, okay, we do need more people, particularly if you're looking at schooling and interested in maths and science. And of course, there are big implications, and Sechin and Charlie did an excellent set of work around many of these issues that go to supply of teachers, as well as capacity and capabilities. But look, the reason we spent quite a bit of time prompted by the, I have a slightly more, probably a more concerned view about the impact of technology and equity. I think the combination of technological and economic concentration and power then leads to really significant political and social disruption. And technology always drives a wedge between, and historically has, between people with those skills and without those skills, or people who can take advantage of work that is enhanced and grants them even more autonomy and authority and agency, versus others who kind of lose that. And by the way, I see somebody put a comment in the chat. I just need to be a bit careful, because the sort of historical economic analysis of technology is absolutely correct. What you're saying is that it leads to productivity enhancements and therefore earnings over time. But what we're seeing, and you can see nations grappling with this at the moment, is that productivity and wage connection is weakening significantly. And that historical trend is under a bit of assault. And Paul Krugman and others are writing about this, so far more authoritative than I am. But look, just to go back to the point about the skill gaps, really probably the biggest skill gap is critical thinking. And it doesn't matter if you're going to go into science or maths, technology, history, choreography. We need students to be finishing at least 13 years of schooling with a very, very strong and skilled capacity to navigate through complexity, through information, and in some cases disinformation, to think about really challenging problems, to be able to work with others who may bring different skill sets. So it's a very rich space of what skills we need going forward. And science and maths is absolutely one of them, no doubt about that. And the only other thing I'd add is, I think your question's well put, Vincent, that it's often assumed the education systems will take care of this problem. But your question, I think, was very well phrased, which is, what is the combination of private sector, public sector that would give us that capacity that we do need to certainly deal with the sort of technological issues, but even these wider sets of issues.
Can I add to that? I absolutely agree. I think this is a bit counterintuitive. People think, employers think we need more data people, we need more coders. Actually, like when we did a review of the Australian, public service, helped with a review of that as far as the future of work and automation related, what we found was there is no shortage of data people. That's fine. I've got enough data people. What they don't have is people who know how to interpret the data and, make, policy and service delivery sort of decisions off the back of that data. So it is a bit of a misnomer. And, when you work with these large, organizations, public sector, private sector, doesn't really matter. The biggest problem I see is that they don't really have an understanding of the workforce that they have, all the workforce that they need, right? So it's, especially in the public sector, the biggest gap is a workforce plan, which is really scary, and I'm not talking a 20-year plan, I'm talking a 5-year plan. People don't really, organizations don't understand the skills and capabilities that their current workforce has, let alone understanding, what they're going to need in 5 years' time, at the level of detail where they can have a plan and say, right, here's where we are, there's what we need. Now, what's our plan to fill the gap? And part of that answer might be reskilling. Part of it might be, immigration doesn't help with our borders closed. And we've faced very real challenges associated with border closures over the past 12 months. In very unexpected ways. It's made us realize how dependent we were on skilled migration in this country. So I think it is one of those areas where you need to think beyond just data skills and tech skills and coding skills, and go, actually, where is the real gap? And we're not going to understand that unless we've got proper analysis and workforce planning, which unfortunately, especially in the public sector, it's not very well advanced at the moment.
Yeah, just a couple of other things to add would be that I think Leslie's point about critical thinking is absolutely key, because that's foundational to be able to, if you like, solve the problems and introduce automation. And in addition to that, also the social skills we found was a very important component. Being able to work with people effectively, and you all get feedback when you go into the workplace of how you're working with your peers and others. It becomes incredibly important in terms of how effective organizations are. So those in addition to the, some of the foundational STEM skills, I think are if anything, more important over the longer term. And the other thing I'd just say, to Leslie's point about the downside or the potential downsides here, with, if we cannot effectively retrain folk who are getting displaced out of these industries, whether it's truck drivers, whether in logistics centres, etc., into other arenas, and that can be complex problems because quite different sets of skills that they need. That will create a real issue, in terms of increased inequality. And we actually did the analysis to show, based on supply and demand of labour in these different industries, that could increase, if we're not successful at retraining these folk, that could increase our Gini coefficient by 30%, which would actually put us in the similar situation to the US. So, we're not as unequal as they are right now, but if we kept on going down, if we weren't effective in retraining, then that's the real downside scenario here. So retraining is absolutely key. And I think that's something, we're all struggling with, how to do that most effectively.
I just want to quickly add one point from Sekin's point about the public service and work planning. And that was something we saw a lot, even from a union perspective, of just the lack of, seeing where people's progression were at. But I think that is a tool of the public service is, it's the employer is the government, and the federal government is the perspective that the community and public sector union, that's the coverage we had. And we always saw that, it was dependent on a government minister and their thoughts. And Laura Tingle's done and has spoken about this, and so many commentators on the, increasing erosion of independence of, especially federal government, of senior bureaucrats, and actually the ministers. And the ministers, I think immigration's a great place to look at. This might be going slightly off tangent, but I do think it comes back to that point I made before about elected representatives and government elected officials, I should say, allowing for that and ensuring there's independence between the public service and allowing them to make a workplace plan despite elections, so that's just the point I wanted to make on that.
Cool. So there are a few questions in the chat right now. So first question is from Harish, and it sort of goes to the point that Leslie made about critical thinking skills. And the question is, so how would you nurture skills like critical thinking, social skills that Charlie mentioned from a policy standpoint? And if we assume educational systems don't effectively address this, what other policies are in place?
Well, I'll take that one. I'll start it off. Let's just put it that way. I mean, the good news is education systems, schooling, universities do know how to teach critical thinking. So the good news is that it's not a matter of how do we approach this. And of course, it all starts with a very strong foundation, literacy and numeracy to access learning, and then what you might call thinking skills like critical thinking or computational thinking to access knowledge and to build upon those. We also have critical thinking strongly embedded in curricula, and again, I'd say in the higher education space as well. You certainly see a lot of critical thinking built into how you are progressing through higher education. One of the challenges is that, at least in schooling, it's that if a lot of the critical thinking depth and even some of the assessment tends to be reserved for an old assumption that needed to be concentrated amongst the highest performers. And so if you look at the HSC, there's a lot of critical thinking that's being tested at those top bands. The policy challenge is that no longer can be the case. These capabilities need to be very widely spread. And that means we have to start to embed them much more, not in the curriculum itself, but across the achievement levels. And that requires potentially different teaching techniques and the like. So the good news is we do know how to do this. We could always do it better, for sure. But it's also, it goes hand in hand with trying to change some of the assumptions about how an education system should get organized.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I actually think our education system is doing a fantastic job. Just speaking as a parent, not as a consultant. I've got an 8-year-old daughter who, came home from kindergarten one day talking about the 7 steps of problem solving, which, I didn't learn till I joined McKinsey. So, it's definitely way, more progress than it was certainly when I went to school. I don't think we've got a problem with the young people growing up. I think the schools have got this. The problem is what do you do about people who are already in the workforce who didn't have the benefit of that kind of education? How do you, reskill those people because they've got another 20, 30 years of work ahead of them? They grew up being able to earn a very decent income without necessarily having those, higher order critical thinking skills. But that won't be the case going forward. So how do you, first of all, raise the awareness that this, is a real issue? And then secondly, how do you actually retrain? Like we've been talking about it for a while now, but there aren't that many examples of, reskilling at scale to enable people already in the workforce to be able to develop those critical thinking and social skills to be competitive in the future world of work.
I know there are a couple more questions, but I'm just really desperate to come in on this. I agree with everything that Leslie and Sachkin have said. But there's another thing, just to really kind of expand on that. When you come to the world of work, increasingly there's a series of barriers really to exercise critical thinking, which we really need to think through a bit better. So let me give a concrete example. Imagine, to choose a controversial concrete example, imagine you're a police officer and as it seems to be happening without any regulation at the moment, you're starting to use facial recognition to identify criminal suspects. Now, if you're essentially presented with a kind of computerized data point that says this person is 75% likely to be the person you're looking for, the criminal suspect, through our facial recognition system. If you're that police officer who gets that information, what do you do with that? How do you think critically about that? What does that 75% mean? Without any context, 75% could be anything. We could say, well, I'm pineapple confident, or I'm avocado confident. Like it's useless information unless you're given the sufficient context to be able to start to exercise your critical thinking. And so that's really, really important. It's kind of empowering people to exercise those skills, which I think Leslie and Sachkin rightly point out are frequently taught. And so what's the dark side of this? The dark side is as humans, we're a little bit susceptible to the presentation of information, particularly that has the kind of veneer of respectability of coming from our computers. And so even if we should not be confident about that kind of recommendation in inverted commas, sometimes we just defer. There's a kind of fancy term for it, which is algorithmic deference, right? We just defer when instead we should be asking a series of quite searching critical questions that might, might take us closer to the truth.
Cool, fantastic. So I think in the interest of time, I think there are a few questions about education and the curriculum. And I think Sachkin and Leslie did a really great job of answering some of those questions. So I might move on to Alexander's question. And I think Alexander's talking about, so if we're continually pushing innovation and pushing for technology, and I think Alexander, by economic output, I think he means like economic output of individuals, potentially not of society as a whole. So what's the benefit of pushing for innovation in tech if the average day person doesn't really benefit much from it?
Well, just a quick reaction to that one. I think that we've seen a lot of benefits just from a convenience point of view. Even very basic things like telehealth and being able to do, and in the presentations we saw today, we saw lots of suggestions about how this benefits consumers and citizens. Probably more focused on the convenience, but also the quality of the service that's being provided. But I would also say it is key to being able to to increasing sort of prosperity and wealth, and with the recognition, I think as Leslie raised, the concern that all goes to the if you like the top, which is a very real concern if the broader workforce doesn't benefit from this in terms of higher incomes. It's not distributed effectively, but it is the main economic lever as well for increasing prosperity, and in the context of an aging population becomes more important. I think there was an interesting question there around blue collar workers as well, and is that going to be obsolete? Interestingly, it's the biggest challenge is to professions which or occupations which are more involved in data handling and management. That's the easiest thing to, the thing that's being most automated right now. In terms of manual labor, robotics is working, but that's going to take a lot longer to take effect. So there's a lot of blue collar work, so-called blue collar, I would say physical labor or more manual work that is still going to, be critical for decades until robots become much more effective. So it's actually quite a lot of the white collar jobs as well that are just as under threat as some of the more automatable blue collar jobs. Just as a reaction to that particular question.
So I might come in and say that a couple of things. One, the very fact that there's 110 or more people on this, the very fact that you've organized, tech for social good, and you've got this competition, it's, and certainly everybody on the judging panel, we come with different perspectives, but all of us inherently see technology as something that is very much part of our lives, and indeed, offers tremendous possibilities. So first point I want to just make is that we need more people like yourselves engaged in this space, raising these questions. There's a separation between technology and then its impact. And as you all know so well, the technology is not a magic box. It is a reflection of the choices and decisions that people have made. So it's very exciting, and that there are people such as yourselves engaging and developing technological solutions, very much aware of these separate questions, or the impact. There is a big, and somebody's raised the question of UBI. There's no doubt that technology is a piece of this wider issue, which is global, of just the concentration of super wealth, and it's a distributional question. UBI, I can tell you, does not get a very good reaction in Australia, but you have versions of it even. Joe Biden has a huge package sitting in the Congress at the moment. He would not call it a UBI, but he's got a whole series of family tax credits and the like, which are aimed at encouraging work, not welfare, but also recognize that, for example, the single biggest, probably the best intervention you can make for a family is to lift them out of poverty. So these are different questions, and I wouldn't want the outcome to be technology is bad, we must stop it. And it's not too late. It is definitely not too late. And we can bend that curve of the trajectory. And we just need more people to be focused on it.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think we're running a bit out of time, and it's honestly really great to see all of the interest and all of the questions being asked in the chat. But so I might conclude by saying just a massive thank you to all of the judges for putting in the time and energy to come to the National Automation Forum and to really offer these really just great, fantastic insights. I personally learned a lot, and I'm sure the entire Tech for Social Good organization and community has really enjoyed this. I'd also like to thank all of the participants in the challenge, and particularly a massive congratulations to the finalists who have really just demonstrated superb intellect and superb talent in terms of like coming up with these really fantastic presentations. I'd also like to thank the judges for giving the time, and Tech for Social Good has actually donated a few books in the names of the judges through this wonderful Indigenous empowerment organization called Deadly Science. So the judges will get some further confirmation about those book donations. And I guess just to wrap things up, so if you're interested in Tech for Social Good, please reach out to us, connect with us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. And yeah, if you're happy to talk about anything, really anything about technology or social good or automation, please feel free to reach out to us. So thank you. Good evening, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the week.
Well done, everyone.
Yeah.
Have a lovely long weekend.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.